In the morning, Mary was overjoyed and ecstatic. What she initially thought was a seasonal exacerbation of gastritis turned out to be a pregnancy, a desired and long-awaited pregnancy from her beloved Roy. Mary spent her entire childhood in an orphanage. She had faint memories of her parents. Her father died at a young age from lung cancer, as he smoked 2 packs a day. Her mother was born with a heart defect and couldn't bear the loss of her husband. Mary was only 4 years old at the time. She remembered her mother fainting and she would run to the neighbours to get a doctor. Her mother had been saved multiple times, but she refused to be hospitalised. There was no one else to look after Mary. Mary remembered someone saying at the funeral, "She loved him so much that she didn't want treatment. She wanted to be with him. She just didn't realise it." Mary was taken to an orphanage where the teachers kindly explained the new routine, the other children and the rules. Mary was obedient, but very withdrawn, like most children in the orphanage. Mary graduated, went to college and met a young man, but he turned out to be one of those who were only interested in physical relationships. Perhaps every girl encounters such individuals. Guys aren't very selective when they're young, and girls are still so naive. After surviving this little tragedy, Mary lifted her head and kept moving forward. She was very lonely. Mary worked at a flower store and even completed florist courses. She loved working with flowers. She felt like a fairy. Even though no one gave her flowers, she was surrounded by them all the time, taking care of them. By the time she was 24, Mary realized that she wanted to take care of more than just flowers. She wanted a man in her life, at least one. She wasn't a bad person, but she had been traumatized, making it extremely difficult for her to build relationships. Mary realized that she had confined herself within 4 walls and began trying to change. She got a cat and started going to the movies every Saturday. She had acquaintances with whom she could sometimes chat or seek advice. Thanks to social networks, communication had become easier by that time. Soon, Anne met Roy. He had just obtained his driver's license and was working as a cab driver. When he spotted her walking in the rain, he slowed down near her. "Hi, do you need a ride?" he asked, rolling down the window. "No, thank you. I don't have money for a cab," Mary confessed honestly. "And I'm not working now. I'll just give you a ride," the stranger offered. Mary got into the car feeling terribly cold and not wanting to catch a cold. Inside the car there was pleasant, calm music playing and the heater was on. Mary quickly relaxed and a relaxed conversation started. Roy drove her home, and the next day he was there at 7 a.m. He waited for her for 2 hours to give her a ride to work. "I feel bad that you're wasting your time waiting for me. You probably have clients, don't you?" she said. "No," he lied. From that day on, they became inseparable. Roy became the only person to whom Mary confided her sorrows and worries, and she became a ray of light and happiness for him. 2 lonely souls met and filled each other's lives with joy. One evening, he came to her place, wanting to surprise her, and noticed smoke coming from the neighbouring apartment. It turned out that the neighbour's iron had caught fire. The fire spread and smoke entered Mary's apartment. She had just come back from work and had fallen asleep. Roy kicked the door, nearly breaking his shoulder, and carried Mary out of the apartment, which was already on fire too. After that accident, he brought her to his rented apartment, and that's how they started living together. They dated for a year until Roy decided to earn money for their wedding. He got a job through an advertisement in the capital. He put his car in the garage and left, promising to return in 2 months. "Please pick up the phone. I have to tell you the great news," Mary whispered in response to the beeps, but unfortunately she couldn't reach Roy. She thought he must be busy at work, and she could inform him about her pregnancy later. Joy was overwhelming her. She was eager to share it with someone. However, she had no relatives, and Mary had made a mistake by telling her boss about the pregnancy. He used to be kind to her, and they had good communication, but after learning about the pregnancy he became nervous and asked Mary to resign voluntarily. I won't demand anything, but I need a job now. I feel good." The boss simply shook his head. "You'll start taking time off, taking sick days. I can't afford it. My business isn't doing well. I only have 3 stores in the city, and there aren't many customers. Sometimes I have to work at almost no profit." Mary was shocked. She silently signed the resignation letter and left, taking her final paycheck. What should she do now? Who would hire a pregnant woman? The apartment had burned down. They promised to repair everything and make the building livable again, but they didn't give her a specific deadline. Mary dialed Roy's number again. He should calm her down and assure her that everything would be all right, that money was not a problem. But Mary could only hear beeps on her phone, and on the 3rd day, instead of beeps, the message changed to, "The subscriber's phone is switched off or out of range." Mary was worried. Roy had never disappeared for such a long time. He didn't even know he was going to be a father. The rent due date was approaching. Mary was angry with Roy. She couldn't afford to pay the rent of his apartment, so she had to find a room in a hostel that was twice as cheap. She had spent 2 days packing and worrying. Mary tried not to cry so as not to stress herself and end up in the hospital, potentially risking the baby. That would be foolish. She assumed that Roy had just lost his phone and would call back soon. When he returned, he would berate her for moving out, and she would berate him for leaving a pregnant woman alone, and then they would cry with joy and relief that they were together again. The landlord of the apartment that Mary had cleaned before leaving yelled at her. "You should have given me 2 weeks' notice. How am I going to find tenants now? And who's going to pay me for the empty period?" he yelled. "I'm sorry, I should have told you yesterday, but 1 day wouldn't have made much difference. Besides, you asked me not to call on weekends." "You've got to use your head. Stupid women. I'll only rent to men now. You're nothing but trouble," said the angry landlord. Mary silently put the keys in his hand and left, feeling ashamed and guilty. She moved into a small room where the constant noise of children and neighbours running through the common corridor with wooden floors kept her awake day and night. She constantly wanted fruit. The child demanded vitamins, and there was less and less money left. To make ends meet, Mary took a job washing dishes at a restaurant. She honestly informed the employer about her pregnancy and financial needs. He allowed her to work for a small fee unofficially. Despite her efforts, Mary struggled to make ends meet. Meanwhile, she filed a police report. "How long has he been missing?" the officer asked. "A long time. It's been the 3rd week, 17 days, Mary clarified. She was pale and exhausted, having rushed there on her lunch hour. "We'll do our best, of course, but in cases like this, there are 3 possible outcomes. He might have died, be in the hospital, beaten and without documents, or he may have met someone else and doesn't want to return. There's a 4th possibility. He may be unable to contact anyone. But people usually go to the police in such cases, and through them they can reach out to their relatives. Does he know your number? Are there any relatives else?" "Oh no, his parents passed away, and his grandmother lives in another country. He has no one here, only me. But he knows my number. I haven't changed it. I've called him so many times. Why doesn't he answer?" Mary shared all the information she knew about Roy's work in the capital and his employer. 4 days later, she received a call. "We checked the morgues and hospitals, but found nothing. We issued a wanted notice, but it has been 4 days now and there have been no results. Typically, if there are no results within the first 3 days, it is unlikely that the person will be found, especially since he disappeared much earlier. Stay strong. If there is any news, we will call you, but please don't get your hopes up. He is likely dead. There is so much crime there." Upon hearing this, Mary felt nauseous and dizzy. She didn't know how to process this information. All day long, she had hoped that the bad news wouldn't be true. However, when she read online claims from others who had also lost loved ones in the overcrowded cities, she realized that the police were not exaggerating. A month later, Mary was quietly walking along the bridge. The embankment was filled with couples who strolled there every evening. They appeared beautiful and happy, some even walking with their children. Mary looked at them and tears welled up in her eyes. She knew she would never walk like that with Roy, as he was gone. And their child, if they had the strength to lift him, would never see his daddy. Such a longing came over her. Hormones were choking from inside. There was a smell of boiled corn, and the baby demanded to eat. But Mary had just today paid all the money for the room she had rented. There were some cereals and potatoes left, enough not to die before the paycheck. Something clicked in her head, and Mary walked to the centre of the bridge. She knew that a jump from there would be lethal. It was too high. Mary wanted it with all her soul. She was exhausted, tired of waiting, suffering. She had absolutely no one to tell about her pregnancy, no one to hug, and no one to ask for advice. She realised that she would probably never see Roy again. "I'm coming to you. We're coming to you, to meet you," she muttered under her breath and walked to the railing. She looked around. There was no one around. Everyone was busy doing their own thing. If she acted decisively, no one would be able to stop her. Mary looked down at the waves. The river was so beautiful in the sunset light. Tears came to her eyes. She wanted to live, but not like this. Not like this. She took a breath, remembering the face of her beloved, and realized that she was ready to make a step because no one needs her here anymore. Suddenly, someone grabbed her arm. Mary flinched, turning around. "Stop thinking about that!" yelled in her face some woman with frizzy grey hair. "I was just—" "Let's go," the strange woman said firmly, as if she were Mary's teacher. Without letting go of Mary's hand, the woman took her to a stall that sold corn and bought her 2 ears. "What's that for?" Mary wondered. "Why? One for you, the other for your baby. And while you're eating, tell me why you wanted to jump. You didn't just want to end your life. You almost took the life of a little being that wants to be born and live." Mary pondered who this woman could be. Apparently she worked at the woman's clinic and knew that Mary was pregnant. Although her baby bump wasn't visible yet, except for a slight bulge, people around her didn't seem to suspect her pregnancy. They sat on a park bench, and Mary enjoyed her corn and cried. It suddenly scared her that she had almost taken that step. How could she? "I'm just so tired. Everything is going wrong for me. I have no money, not even for this corn. My fiancé disappeared in the capital. I have no one and nothing," she confessed. The woman shook her head. "And what about the child? Do you know how many wealthy people yearn for children but can't have them? You can buy anything except for this. And you have everything. Youth, health, and a baby. You're richer than most people around you," the woman said to her. Mary looked into her green eyes and tried to recall if she had seen her before. "And you must work at the women's clinic?" she asked. "No, I work here. I'm a fortune teller. This is my territory. I'm not a fraud. I'm a real clairvoyant," the woman said with dignity. Mary didn't believe in fortune telling. "And how did you realize I was pregnant?" Mary asked. "You have the aura of a pregnant woman, and you should already have a feeling that it's a boy you're expecting," the woman claimed. "I thought it was a girl." "You're having a boy. You'll give birth naturally, don't worry. Everything will go smoothly. You're healthy, and minor health issues. We all have them. There's no evil eye or curse on you. You're pure and good, unless you're troubled at heart." Mary pressed her lips together. "Don't waste your time on me. I don't have any money to pay. I don't even have anything to sell." "I don't accept anything from those in despair. God himself pushed me forward, and I saw you. I was on the edge, just like you. I just want to help. If you don't believe in fortune-telling, that's fine. I'm also a human being. Here's my phone number. If you're going through a tough time or need anything, call me. I work nearby," the woman offered. Mary took the business card, which read, "Psychic Teresa." It sounded extremely implausible. "My name is Mary. Thank you for saving me. I won't do it again, really. I must be crazy. Just hormones. And I really wanted that con." Mary smiled with gratitude. Teresa smiled back and held her hand. "I see many losses in your life. You lost your parents when you were a little child. You grew up in an orphanage, surrounded by many children. Childhood trauma has left its mark on your soul. But today was not the day for you to die. Tomorrow was the day our paths were meant to cross. The dark path beneath your feet is now behind you, and you've already stepped onto the bright path. Everything will be fine in your life from now on. I see a wedding and wealth coming very soon." Mary laughed. "I'm telling you, my fiancé is missing. Will he turn up?" she asked hopefully. The fortune-teller looked at the lines on her palm. "I see that he has vanished from your life. You are left alone. But the wedding will not be with him. It will be someone else. A red-haired man." Mary withdrew her hand. "That's enough, really. It's all nonsense. Don't be offended, but I am now like a widow. I've lost the love of my life. Would I marry another man? Would a wealthy red-haired man look at me, a beggar? Who would want a pregnant orphan? I know you mean well, but you're painting too rosy a picture. I don't believe it." Teresa shrugged. "It doesn't matter, honey. Just don't do anything else foolish. This baby wants to be born and will bring you happiness." "Did you see that in my palm too?" Mary asked. "No, I'm telling you this as a mum. I have 3 sons, and I am the happiest mum." After saying goodbye to Teresa, Mary left. Their conversation was, of course, stunning. As she was leaving, another woman, apparently a regular client, approached Teresa and asked her to read her fortune. Apparently, Teresa was known to many people here, and many believed in her words. However, to Mary, Teresa was just an ordinary, retired housewife who had overwatched Psychic Challenge and now did fortune-telling on the bridge on Thursdays. On her way home, Mary saw a crumpled bill flying across the road. It was $100 note. She looked around. There was no one around, so Mary decided to keep the money for herself. "Well, the white streak has begun," she smiled. Mary went to the store and bought some groceries. She got a good discount at the cash register because of a promotion. Luck was on her side again. Back home, Mary took a sedative. The thought that she had almost jumped off the bridge scared her. What was she thinking? Stupid. As she fell asleep in the evening, she thought that maybe it wasn't so bad. Yes, Roy was missed, and it was a huge loss, but there was nothing she could do. She could only keep on living. The next day, her boss raised her salary and told her that the probationary period was over. Mary turned out to be a responsible employee. Mary was happy with such a beautiful day. Everything was going great. The restaurant's cook found out that the dishwasher was expecting a child and began to bring her fruits and delicacies from time to time. Was Teresa really a clairvoyant? That same evening on her way home, Mary almost got hit by a car. The car suddenly turned out of the corner, and currently Mary twisted her leg so sharply that she fell right onto the road. The car was expensive and had time to slow down. A young man got out of the car. Mary was afraid he would start yelling at her. She couldn't stand being scolded since childhood. "How are you? I'm sorry, it all happened so fast," the man said, helping her up from the pavement. She looked up at him and smiled. "You're a redhead." The man laughed, helping the girl out of the way. There were already cars honking behind them, unhappy that they had to detour a huge white car across the oncoming lane. "Yes, but why did it make you laugh?" "Sorry, it's just nonsense." Mary tried to stand on her foot, but immediately shrieked in pain. "Get in. I'll give you a ride to the emergency room." "Thank you." Mary got into the car. The conversation flowed as if they had known each other all their lives. The man introduced himself. His name was Jason. He drove Mary to a private clinic and personally escorted her to a doctor he knew. "We need to get an X-ray," the doctor announced. Mary shook her head. "No, I can't. I'm pregnant. I won't expose the baby to unnecessary radiation. Whatever it is, it will heal." Jason was very upset by what he heard. Currently, he was ready to fall in love with her, but it turned out that she was pregnant. The doctor nodded. "In that case, let's hope there are no fractures. It doesn't look like it. It's probably a sprain. I'll put a bandage on it and give you some ointment. It won't harm the baby. It contains menthol and herbs. Just rub it in, and the pain will go away." When Mary left the office with Jason, he looked into her eyes. "So, you're married? I noticed you weren't wearing a ring, so I assumed you were single." Mary smiled. "No, I'm not married. I'm single." "Alone and pregnant?" She nodded. "It happens that way too," Mary said. Jason smiled and asked for her phone number before driving her home. Mary didn't believe Teresa's prophecy would come true. However, to her surprise, Jason called her back that same evening. "How's your leg?" he asked. "It's great. It hardly hurts at all. You shouldn't have bothered," Mary replied. "You know, I have a completely crazy proposition for you. You're going to be shocked," Jason said. Mary raised her eyebrows while lying on the sofa in her tiny room. "Do you want to marry me?" she asked with a smile. There was a pause on the other end of the phone. Then Jason responded, "Actually, yes." Mary burst into laughter. "I'll explain everything to you right now. The thing is, I come from a very wealthy family. I'm 24 and they're pressuring me to get married. My father has restricted my access to money as he lives abroad and rarely comes back. And my mother is tired of me clubbing, drinking and bringing a different girl home every night." "Oh, you're the perfect husband," Mary laughed. Jason laughed too. "You're absolutely right. Now, the talk has already started about disinheriting me. My mum wants grandchildren. I was a late child in my parents' lives, a surprise baby, so my mum says she's getting old and constantly pressures me. I understand her, but I'm not ready to start a real family. I'm only 24. Many people your age already have 2 kids. Can't you find a decent girl?" Jason sighed. "I've never been in love. I guess it's just not for me. I like different girls and I like my lifestyle. That's just who I am. And it's in my genes. My father couldn't live with his family either. My mother got tired of his cheating and they eventually split up. My dad does business in another country while she stays here. They're not divorced, but they don't live together. I'm not cut out for family life either." "What do you want from me, you naughty boy?" Mary didn't think he was serious. She saw Jason as a funny boy who hadn't grown up yet. "Marry me. You said you were alone with the baby, and I've seen where you live. It's a run-down dump. No one should have to live there. I'm offering you a life of luxury. You and your child won't be destitute. We'll sign a prenup. My parents will make me do it. Your child will have my name on the birth certificate, and I'll be the father. And my mum will finally calm down." Mary stopped smiling. "Why do you need a fake family? Wouldn't it be easier to arrange with your parents? Or at least ask one of your girlfriends to have a child for you. Offer them the same terms, and it would be your own child. You could settle down," Mary suggested. "No, that's not for me. I don't want children. My mum doesn't know, but I've had a vasectomy. One girl tried to blackmail me, claiming she was pregnant with my child. She wanted to marry me for money, of course. And we only slept together once. I'm always cautious. Her lies were exposed. She wasn't pregnant at all, and I went to the clinic and had the operation. Now no one can take advantage of me like that, and I can continue to have fun like before. Mary, I understand that my proposal is unexpected, It's crazy, Mary interrupted. Yes, you're right, but I've taken a liking to you. If it weren't for your situation, I would want to add you to my list of girlfriends. I have asked you out on a date and tried to get you into bed. Well, honestly, that's just who I am. I can't help it. But you're a good girl, and we can help each other. We'll get married, and you can live with me while I continue to party like I used to. You'll lie to my mum and tell her I'm working so she won't bother me. She'll be happy, and she'll babysit your kid. Is that so bad? You said today that you're an orphan. I thought this would be perfect for us. Think about it, okay? You'll be well off and your child won't be in need. What more could you ask for? Mary pondered for days. What confused her the most was that Roy hadn't been reported dead yet. What if he was found? How would she explain that she had married someone else? And what would she do then? Hope didn't want to die within her, and Mary decided to refuse. However, the next day, while washing dishes at the restaurant, Mary changed her mind. It was hard for her to be alone. She imagined how she would live when she gave birth. Who would she leave the baby with? How to work? What to live on? Mary understood from the very beginning that she would most likely have to seek help at one of these centres for mothers in difficult situations. And now Jason was offering her the option of not having to worry about food and a roof over her head. Why should she give it up? Yes, Roy was the love of her life, but Jason isn't dragging her into bed. He's only offering her a roof over her head. His elderly mother will have a grandson, and Mary's son will have a grandmother. He wouldn't have any other way. It's not just an option. It's the best thing that happened to her in a long time. Mary called Jason back and told him she was in. Great! Don't worry, we'll only be husband and wife on paper. I promise not to hit on you. I'll be your business partner. Jason, what if the father of my child comes back? Asked Mary. I can't rule it out. He went missing in the capital, went to work and didn't come back. I still love him. Jason sighed. You'll go to him. I'll play a story in front of my mum that the child was not mine. Well, there's also the possibility that I'll meet a girl I'll love. Then I'll break our pact myself. And I'll have to make up a cover story in front of my mum too. How much easier it would be if my parents accepted me for who I am. But after all, they're constantly pressuring, blackmailing, almost marrying me off to the daughter of a family friend. Mary smiled. What's wrong with the daughter of a family friend? She asked. They're too religious. Goodbye alcohol and all my entertainment. So they decided that they would reserve the right to break off the relationship at the will of either party. It would be spelled out in their contract, which Jason's parents must not know about. And in the evening of the same day, Mary received a call from the police. Her heart sank. They found him, she thought. Mary, good evening. I'm calling to inform you that Roy Isler has not been found and has not been declared missing today. If you need such a certificate, you can apply to our department tomorrow. Mary cried for a long time. All sorts of thoughts came into her head. What if it was her fault? Mary slapped her face and washed her face with ice water. Enough hysterics, she said rudely to her reflection in the mirror. You're doing this for Roy's baby. The meeting with Jason's parents went as usual. Mary was distressed, but in vain. Mrs. Pratt turned out to be exactly as she had imagined her. Authoritative, categorical, but well-mannered. She had a very short haircut, grey hair with swarthy skin. Incredibly beautiful for a woman in her 70s. She looked just fine for her age. Apparently she lived in beauty parlours. Jason inherited her beauty. The rest of his traits came from his father. Stubbornness, a desire to live the way he wanted to live, not the way he was told. Jason's father came all the way from abroad for this event. The day before, Jason had brought Mary to a boutique, where she was embarrassed to be. Let's buy you something here. My parents should see that I've been taking care of you for a long time. That way, I can justify some of my expenses over the last few months," he said. Mary raised her eyebrows. "And what were those expenses really, if it's no secret?" she asked, trying to get to know her future spouse better. "What secrets? We're married in 5 minutes," he said, kissing the top of her head. "I've spent the money on my parties." Mary shook her head reproachfully. At that moment, Jason's friend Stella came up. She was a perfectly glamorous girl, beside whom Mary immediately felt like an unshod redneck. "This is my Mary. Please help her, as agreed." Jason winked at her. The pretty girl looked at Mary and smiled. "Jason's friend is my friend. Of course we'll make her a supergirl from Vogue," Stella answered. Mary thought she would encounter arrogance, but Stella turned out to be very friendly. They got along quickly. Jason didn't tell his friend about the details of their deal, presenting her as an acquaintance who needed to be dressed up. Stella helped Mary pick out an entire wardrobe, and Mary had never bought so many clothes at once before. It was a great experience. When they were done, Jason drove up and picked up Mary and her things. They were ready to meet his parents. The legend was rehearsed. Mr. Pratt spoke privately to Mary. He said, "I hope you realize that you can't take advantage of our family's situation. We have lawyers, and the marriage contract will be drafted to protect us from any potential lawsuits." Mary had been expecting this conversation. Jason had warned her, but it was still uncomfortable. With anger she replied, "I grew up in an orphanage. I can survive any situation like a cockroach. I don't need your money. It's just that, for some reason, Jason is in love with me, and I'm in love with him too. If I leave him, I won't take anything from you." "Forgive me, it's just the way I am. I didn't know that you were from the orphanage," said Mr. Pratt. "I'll sign any piece of paper you want, but don't treat me like a con artist. If you keep looking at me like that, I'll pack my things and leave. I would do anything for Jason, but I won't tolerate humiliation, and I don't care about your wealth. Do you understand?" Mary felt herself getting hot and took a deep breath. Mr. Pratt apologized once more and returned with Mary to the dining room. Next, Jason's mother questioned Mary. "Don't you remember your parents at all? Who were they?" Mrs. Pratt asked. "Mum, stop it. This is why I've been avoiding you all this time. You and Dad don't even care about her situation. But what kind of people are you?" Jason took Mary's hand. She smiled and looked at him affectionately. "It's okay. Don't worry." Mary answered all of her future mother-in-law's questions, including the ones that followed. She also made it clear that she wouldn't tolerate humiliation or suspicion. That concluded the visit. Jason drove her home. "Pack your things. I'll pick you up tomorrow. According to our legend, we'll spend the night here together, and tomorrow you'll move in with me," he said. Mary nodded. "Okay, whatever you say. If your parents ask me, I'll say you were with me." He winked at her and left. Mary sank on the bed, feeling completely drained. Jason's parents were overjoyed to learn that he had a girlfriend who was expecting a child. In their society, it was shameful to get married because of a baby, so Mrs. Pratt didn't want to organize a lavish wedding because of Mary's pregnancy. The next morning, Jason picked up the bride, carried all her bags, and loaded them into the car. "In one of the bags I saw pictures. Is that your Roy?" he asked. "Yes, that's him. The last pictures are of him. Try not to show them to my mum. She'll have questions. You don't want to get caught in lies. We've already made up enough of them." "Yeah, okay." "And my advice to you is to digitize them and save them in the cloud. That way they'll never get lost. Paper copies can easily get lost." The wedding was modest, with only a few family friends in attendance. Mary got to know everyone, but she didn't appreciate their judgmental glances. People whispered and stared, making Mary feel improper. "Relax, these jackals will go home soon," Jason reassured her. Mrs. Pratt insisted that Mary wear a dress, even though it was a soft pink colour that Mary didn't like, but she understood her role and kept silent. Now, Mary no longer had to wash dishes at the restaurant, and her pregnancy was being monitored at the best clinic in town. She had many scheduled tests, and she was growing tired of dealing with all this attention. Life in the new house was much more comfortable than in the tiny room. Mary had a spacious bedroom. It felt like having an apartment within the house, with a large bedroom, a study, a walk-in closet, a bathroom, a toilet, and a loggia. The view from the huge windows was absolutely gorgeous. After the wedding, Jason took Mary to the sea for a week. During their stay, Jason entertained other women in the adjacent room. Mary could hear them at night, but she didn't complain. It was her first time at the sea, and she was flying first class and staying in a luxury hotel. Mary quickly adapted to her role as the ideal wife. Despite Mrs. Pratt's willfulness, Mary tried her best to please her, and they lived peacefully without quarrels. However, Mary always felt her neglect and disappointment. Of course, not the kind of daughter-in-law she had dreamed of. However, when it came to Jason's son, Mary's eyes would light up. She eagerly anticipated the arrival of her grandson. Mary felt guilty about the deception, but she knew that if Jason hadn't gone along with it, Mrs. Pratt would never experience holding the baby in her arms and calling him her beloved grandson. Jason showed little interest in her pregnancy. He was hardly ever at home. Mary was lying about his attentiveness, how he called her and showed concern for the baby's health. Closer to the birth, they had a heated argument about the baby's name. "I want to participate in the choice," said Mrs. Pratt. Jason argued with her. He realized that he had no right to interfere with it. "I promised Mary that she would choose the name herself. I will give him my surname." "Can't she at least choose the name?" Jason said. Mary smiled, gently stroking her large belly. "Mrs. Pratt, what name did you have in mind?" she asked, curious to know what pretentious name her mother-in-law would suggest for her grandson. "I wanted to suggest the name Roy. I've always liked it. I wanted to name you that, but your father chose the name Jason, although he also gave you a surname and patronymic," Mrs. Pratt replied. Mary looked at Jason, and tears welled up in her eyes. She hadn't expected to hear that. "What's wrong? No, don't be upset. I just wanted to provide a suggestion," her mother-in-law said, realizing that she had spoken too harshly and offended Mary. No, it's just hormones. I'm sorry. I really liked the name. I didn't even think about it, Mrs. Pratt. I want my son to be named Roy." Mary smiled, taking her mother-in-law's hands. "Our son," Jason corrected her. Mary nodded. She misspoke, but her mother-in-law let it slide. She was ecstatic that her daughter-in-law had accepted her suggestion. For the next week, she didn't even cast contemptuous glances at Mary. Jason was indifferent to what the child would be named. Mary increasingly realized that he had never truly grown up. Despite being 24 years old, he behaved like a teenager, good, kind and cunning, but he always treated Mary kindly and provided for her. The birth took place in the best hospital. Mary was exhausted as labour lasted 20 hours and painkillers provided little relief. But when she held little Roy in her arms, all her suffering was forgotten. Jason, as a good father and husband should, patiently waited in the corridor. In the evening, the doctor allowed him to hold the baby in his arms. "Wow, he's so tiny," Jason smiled. "Maybe I should have done this surgery for nothing. Having kids isn't so bad." "You can have it all back, and you can have kids, can't you?" she asked. Mary sincerely wished Jason happiness. They had become good friends during this time. Mary knew that she could rely on him. They stood by each other, protecting their little lies and playing their respective roles. "No, I'm not that amazed yet," he laughed softly. "But I congratulate you, Mary. May this baby always be the happiest." Jason carefully kissed the baby on the forehead and returned him to his mother. In fact, since then, he rarely took him in his arms. But Mrs. Pratt never left Mary and the baby. They cooed over him together. Her mother-in-law sometimes took him out all night, allowing Mary to sleep. After a few months, she realized she could trust her with the baby, although she was confused by her total attachment to him. Mrs. Pratt thought only of him, talked only of him. Mary worried that she would go mad if the truth were revealed. And when her son was 6 months old, the worst happened. No one was ready for it. Mrs. Pratt was in a wonderful mood that day. She was holding her beloved grandson in her arms when the phone rang. Mary was there, sitting in a chair. "Mary, take Roy," said Mrs. Pratt, after hanging on. "Something's happened," Mary asked. "Yes. Jason crashed in an accident. He's dead. We have to go to identify the body," she said, as if it was something insignificant. Mary took the baby and sank into the chair. Tears sprang from her eyes. Mrs. Pratt didn't cry then, nor did she cry at the lineup. She simply did what was necessary. But she stopped smiling. For good. Jason was hit by a car at a crosswalk. He had parked his car and was crossing the road, holding a bouquet of flowers for his girlfriend. Another person, rushing to deliver post, hit Jason, and he died at the scene before the ambulance arrived. The accident was attributed to Jason wearing headphones. The driver was prosecuted, and there were court proceedings, but Mrs. Pratt and her husband did not attend. Mary's mother-in-law chose the coffin with frightening equanimity and arranged the farewell ceremony. She held it as if she did not realize what had happened. It wasn't until they reached the cemetery that she burst into tears. She cried for a long time, cried for nights. Mary was by her side and tried to support her. Jason's father left immediately after the funeral. Mary asked him to stay with his wife, but he said he couldn't stay there. After the funeral, Mrs. Pratt did not leave her room for several days, until she accidentally ran into Mary in the kitchen. Mary had come there with her son in her arms. "May I?" Mrs. Pratt asked, aged a dozen years at once. Mary nodded and gave the child into her arms. Mary realized that she needed a distraction because she considered Roy to be Jason's son, his continuation. One day, she went into her mother-in-law's room and didn't find her there. The child was also missing. Mary began to panic. She started calling, but Mrs. Pratt's cell phone lay at home on her bed. Mary threw on a sweater and ran out into the yard. She made her way around and was about to call the police when she ran into her mother-in-law at the door. "God, where have you been? I was so worried." Mary snatched the baby out of her mother-in-law's arms. The woman raised her eyebrows. "I just went to the store with Roy, decided to treat him, bought him a toy. What's the panic?" Mary took the child and went into the house. From that day on, her mind began to come to her more and more often about leaving that house. The kindergarten, where she wanted to take her son before she met Jason, accepted children from the age of 1.5. There was a nursery group for such babies. Mary had thought of everything. She had some savings. Intuitively, she realized that one day she would have to leave this house. That's why she was saving money. Now she could rent a normal apartment, not rush to get a job, and not worry about money for at least 6 months. But Mary couldn't just leave her mother-in-law. Jason had been so kind to her, and he would not forgive her if she found out that Mary had simply taken away her child, whom she considered a grandchild. They continued to live together for another month. "Do you know why Jason crashed?" Mrs. Pratt asked once. Mary tensed. Mrs. Pratt had not spoken about her son once since the day he died. "He was crossing the road with headphones on. He arrived at his mistress's house and was walking towards her and talking to her through those very headphones. Did you know about it?" Mrs. Pratt asked bluntly. Mary shook her head, afraid her eyes would give her away. You think I didn't understand everything from the beginning. You think I didn't see that you're just looking for an excuse to run away from this home. I heard you calling your old job." Mary was taken aback. She sat silently staring at her mother-in-law. "You've got it all wrong. I'll explain." The mother-in-law smiled wryly. "What did I misunderstand? Do you think I didn't know that Jason and you were in cahoots from the beginning? I know perfectly well that Roy is not my grandson. I don't know where my son found you and why you've started this play." Mary looked her mother-in-law straight in the eyes. There was nothing to lose. "We met him by chance and agreed. My fiancé had gone missing. I was all alone. I had nothing to eat. I agreed out of desperation, but believe me, I had no malicious intent." Mary sighed, relieved to have revealed everything. Mrs. Pratt looked at her with disdain. "That's the way it's always been. Jason always dragged drab cats from the garbage dump, dogs, and dragged you in the end. He had a good heart. I did a DNA test. I wanted to put you to shame a long time ago, but I realized that Jason wasn't stupid, which meant he knew the baby wasn't his. Then he has gone. And now all I have left is Roy. And I don't care that he's not my blood. I'm attached to the boy, and I won't let you leave with him." Mary was confused. "Okay, we'll stay. As long as you don't want us to leave, I'll stay with you. I understand everything, and I won't leave you," she said. "You don't understand me. You can go on your way. The child will stay with me. Since all my friends know that I have a grandchild, I won't let you drag our name in the mud, and I won't let you dishonor my son's name. You will never prove to anyone that the baby is not Jason's. Do you understand? And if you do, I'll say you're a drug addict. I'll charge you with fraud, and I'll take the baby away from you in court. As you realize, I have enough connections and money to do that." Mary went cold inside. "What are you talking about?" "Are you stupid? I'm saying you can stay home, but now only as a nanny for Roy." "He's my son!" yelled Mary. "He's my grandson, and if you try to run away, you'll never see him again." The mother-in-law got up and left. Mary clutched Roy to her. This woman has enough resources to pull off what she's up to. Mary was in shock. The mere thought of being separated from her son made her unbearably terrified. Roy was her world. She lived only for him. He looked at her every day with his father's eyes and reminded her of his love. Mary suddenly remembered how she had met that fortune-teller on the bridge, how she had saved her, gave her her card. Mary looked for it for a long time, digging through everything in the room, but found it. When her mother-in-law took Roy for a swim, Mary dialed her number. "Hello, Teresa. You probably don't remember me. My name is Mary." She told the fortune-teller the whole story, and she promised to help. The very next morning, Teresa entered their house in her maid's uniform. Mrs. Pratt called assistance from the agency almost every day to fulfill her whims. This time, by some miracle, Teresa arrived. She walked past Mary with a wink. When all the chores were done by Teresa's caring hands and Mrs. Pratt was asleep in her room, Mary quietly entered the kitchen. "What are you hiding? Come in," smiled Teresa. "What about Mrs. Pratt?" "She's asleep. I slipped her some sleeping pills. She'll sleep for another 5 hours at least. Pack quietly and come with me." Mary did not expect to be able to fly out of her golden cage the very next day. She didn't hesitate. She packed only the essentials, leaving almost everything she had bought with Jason's money. Teresa called a car. A white van without license plates pulled up at the house. Teresa, Mary and the baby got into it. They left in broad daylight, taking only 2 bags of things. The fortune-teller brought them back to her place. Mary was tired, sweating. The apartment was small but cozy. There were 3 spare rooms. "You know, I lied to you then about the white streak. I noticed that another death and deceit awaited you, But I told you about the wedding so that you would not be discouraged. I was afraid for you," Teresa recalled. "Yes, you saved me. And it turned out just like you said. You know, Teresa, I don't believe in fortune-telling, but I believe in you. This is the second time you've saved me," said Mary. It was hot in the room, so she took off her sweater, revealing an ugly old scar on her bare shoulder. It was small but noticeable. "Where did that come from?" Teresa asked, freezing in place, startled. "I've had it since birth." Mary waved her hand. But Teresa looked at her quite differently. She sat Mary down at the table and told her that, in addition to her 3 sons, who had now travelled the world, she had a daughter. The daughter had been stolen from her a long time ago and had been traumatized at birth. Her shoulder was damaged, leaving a scar. Mary couldn't believe such a coincidence, but Teresa begged her to take a DNA test. "I remember my parents. It can't be," Mary said. She started living with Teresa, got a job and took Roy to the nursery. Mary couldn't formalize it legally because she was afraid that Mrs. Pratt would find them through the child. Mary also took on part-time jobs to save up more money to move to another city. Teresa sheltered them, provided them with food, and helped them with everything, like a native mother. A month later it was revealed that Mary and Teresa were indeed mother and daughter. Mary still wondered how it could be possible, as she remembered her own parents. She knew she had to do some real investigating to uncover the truth. She found an old friend of her late father's who told her that her parents had trouble with having a baby. Mary's mother had been praying for a child. Suddenly a little girl appeared on their doorstep. They decided not to take her to the authorities and instead paid to have Mary registered as their own daughter. In those days, documentation was confusing. So Mary found her birth mother, and Teresa found her daughter, whom she had cried for every night for years. They began living together as a family. But Mary was also worried that Mrs. Pratt could make her threats come true at any time. One day Mary decided to confront her. She entered Mrs. Pratt's house and found an aged, lonely woman in the kitchen, drinking whiskey. Mary had never seen her drink alcohol before. "Why have you come?" Mrs. Pratt asked. "I came to tell you that I'm tired of hiding. I want to make a truce. I want you to stop trying to take Roy away from me." "I wasn't looking for you. I don't have much time left anyway." It turned out that Mrs. Pratt had been terminally ill for a long time, and the death of her son had crippled her. The woman was just afraid of being alone and threatened Mary out of fear. After revealing that truth, Mary invited Teresa to meet Mrs. Pratt. Teresa looked at Mrs. Pratt's hand and saw that her lifeline was ending soon. "You will live for a long time. Don't be afraid. The disease will recede. And Mary and her son will be with you all the time. Everything will be fine," said Teresa, looking into Mrs. Pratt's eyes. Only when they returned home did Teresa confess to her daughter that her former mother-in-law would not live for more than a year. Mary packed her things to temporarily move in with Mrs. Pratt. She and Teresa had discussed that it would be better that way. Mary felt indebted to Jason and decided to be there for his mother until the end. When everything was packed, the doorbell rang. Roy stood on the threshold. Mary was overwhelmed with astonishment when she saw her beloved. She cried and hugged him tightly. Later they had a serious conversation, and Mary confessed that she had married another man out of desperate hunger. She told him about Jason and her dying mother-in-law. She told him about Teresa, who turned out to be her own mother, and her 3 brothers, whom she had turned out to have. Roy was upset that his son didn't have his surname. Mary tried to explain the situation and why she couldn't change the documents immediately. "Please understand, Mrs. Pratt is in her last months. She wants to believe that this is her grandson. She lost her son. We'll change everything once she's gone. If you'd like to, of course." In his turn, Roy told her that he was robbed and in a coma for 6 months. After recovering his memory and undergoing treatment, he turned to the police, and it was only now that they were able to find Mary. He had his own incredible story, where he found friends and was helped by complete strangers. His journey to the woman he loved was long, and now, holding her in his arms, he couldn't believe that Mary would just pack her things and go to live in another place without him. "But Jason and I had nothing, and I can't leave a dying woman alone." "Can you leave me? After everything?" They were quarrelling in the kitchen, and only Teresa could resolve the argument. "Calm down. You don't know what Mary has been through. She'll take care of the sick woman, but you'll still see each other every day. Mary will go out with the baby. That's how you'll see each other," said Teresa. Teresa always spoke confidently, and people believed her. Maybe that was her gift. Mary moved with the baby to Mrs. Pratt's house and lived with her for another 4 months. She brightened Mrs. Pratt's last days, and Mrs. Pratt was so grateful to Mary that she left her the huge house from which Mary had fled. After Mrs. Pratt passed away, Mary sold the inherited house, since it was too sad and expensive to maintain. They bought a smaller house, and soon its new owners moved in. A fortune teller from the Quay, Teresa, Roy, and the little boy. Teresa's sons, Mary's siblings, often visited them. Roy and Mary are happy and planning to have a second child. Teresa says they will have more babies.